Is it at 7 or 8?
It's about an experience you'll be able to share. It's right now, 7 o'clock.
It's at 7 o'clock.
Yes, it is. It's right now. I'm about to stream this thing on social media. So we get this thing moving. It's be awesome. And actually, they're on the call with me right now. OMGG. Where'd it go? There you are. Look how good you two look on camera. Go ahead and unmute yourselves.
Hello, hello.
Hello. How are you, handsome?
Good. How are you?
I am great. I'm trying to get this to stream on social media real quick so we can get started. But yeah, this is going to be a very raw conversation. So let's see, we were going to do this.
You know any other kind, Jacob?
Also,
not with the two of you. No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Hi, I'm
I know
Susan.
they
How you
exist.
doing, Terry?
hi, Susan, Terry. Nice to meet you.
You too, man.
Oh, okay. So I'm just going to reading some of my notes again from your book. And I'm like, yeah, I guess we are going to talk about some of this, which I was going to try to make nice and light and breezy, but maybe not.
No, I don't think it calls for that generally, which is good.
Oh, you are all wondering.
I'm never able to find you
No.
on Facebook.
Oh, okay. Here we are. Let me get this going. I'm going to make sure I'm here and I mute the social media. Then we're going to go and start recording everything. So it'll be cool. Ah, a little nervous. Oh, it's already recording. Okay. Hello, guys. Okay, I believe we're now streaming. Wonderful. So hello, everyone, and welcome. I've also got Pam here and Matthew, and I'm joined here with our special guest today, Mr. Terry Dyer, who is the author of Letters to a Gay Black Boy, which is a fantastic book that I've been reading. So for those of you who don't know, we're sleeping under a rock somehow in 2020. We kind of had a cultural awakening while we were locked in, our own homes in prison. And we are going to, this is a very interesting day because today is finally when we are seeing some police officers being finally held accountable for one of many misgivings.
Yes.
Wrongful death. So I think this is actually really cool that we're having this today. That was not planned, by the way. I didn't know it was going to happen today. That was totally not what we did at all. But anyway, it's not a very long book that you've written here, Terry, Letters to a Gay Black Boy. But oh my God. What? First of all, I'm going to stop having people on the show that have books that make you think so much when it comes to one chapter. It just takes a lot of work, but still, wow. Okay, so fair warning, these are going to be very sensitive topics we're discussing. We are going to talk about some of the issues that specifically gay Black men face in our society, but also how we can relate to them as both human beings, Americans, just whether you're gay or straight. There's so many poignant things in here, but we all have questions that we want to ask, but we're also scared to ask. So what I want this to be is a safe place where people can feel free to ask the wrong questions, as long as you are also open to receiving insight on how those questions are insensitive and how they can be asked in a more effective manner. Is that a fair statement? Can we all agree to that? Safe space? Yes?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. So let's change the conversation. So welcome to the show, Terry.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited. I love these types of conversations. So anytime I can have them, I'm here for it.
I'm so glad you're able to do it because I find it so important now, especially with everything that happened in 2020. People are actually open to having these discussions and trying to learn about equality and racial tension and these alternative histories that oh my gosh, I need to stop saying that. The other histories that happened that we did not know about, we were not taught about in school, and we need to learn more of. So that's actually something that you really do touch on a bit here. So, but before, as we get started, tell us, how would you describe Letters to a Gay Black Boy?
Ooh, good jumping off question. The best way that I describe the book is it is not for everyone, but I do hope that people pick it up because I think in some way, shape, form, or fashion, you will relate to one of the letters written in the book. I think it's going to really, truly change perspectives for folks. And then also to get people to understand that all we truly need to do is have conversations around these sensitive subjects, and things could start to change. The needle can start to change, and we'll start to, kind of get past that uncomfortable space that we generally are around these sensitive topics. So I think the best way to describe it is that fasten your seatbelt, because I do take you on a very real, raw, authentic journey in this book. And I call out things that we don't tend to like to have conversations about. And I think, in this day and age, after everything that you just shared that we went through in 2020, it's about time that we put it all out on the table and talk about it and figure out how we can move forward.
How you write the book is so interesting because it's clear that you are college educated. It's clear that you know how to write, but the way in which you write, it's very like 1, 2, punch. Like, okay, okay. Where are we in this? And it's funny because it's all in like one paragraph. You'll go like, oh wow, he achieved so much. Oh my God, what happened? And then 1 second, I need one moment. Here we go. And there's so much that we can relate to. So where did you grow up, Terry?
So I was born in the Midwest in Kansas City, Kansas. And when I was about 7 years old, I know, Dorothy and Toto, it's like this, we really are. And then when I was about 7.5, 8 years old, we moved to California. So I do say that I am a California boy because I've spent 90% of my life in California. I've lived in other places and in Utah. Obviously, I now reside in South Florida. I've lived in China, for example. So I've lived in a few different places, but I am absolutely a California boy at heart.
So one of the things I want to really hone this conversation in on is because it's Letters to a Gay Black Boy, I wanted to really address this to what we would tell kids and how to ask for help as a kid, plus how to help parents understand certain things about having gay children or LGBTQ children. And actually, this is a great, this community is perfect for it. So yes. The people on this call, and if you're on Facebook, if you'd like to join, I will put the link in the chat box in a minute so you can come in here and join in. But it's so interesting because you are, we've had a couple of discussions about another one of my favorite books, The Velvet Rage, which you and I have talked about.
Yes.
And you have like all the classic symptoms of an overachieving gay male. It's like, yeah, I've done that. So if you were to describe yourself as a young boy, but let's say before the age of 12, because I know what happens after that point.
Yeah.
How would you describe yourself pre-puberty? How would you describe yourself as a young boy?
I would describe myself as extremely curious. I would also describe myself as someone who, although 10, 11, 12, I, in theory, was probably about 20, 21, 22 years old, sort of faced with things that children that age should never truly be faced with or have to, have conversations with their parents about, should never really sort of observe in their environment. So I had to grow up extremely, extremely, extremely fast. Now, do I regret that or wish I could have changed that? Absolutely not, because one of the things that I have learned since the book has come out is every single experience, every single person, everything that I had to endure during my lifetime has specifically led me to this point. It has led me to be a voice for the voiceless. It has led me to be a vessel for those that don't know how to handle or deal with certain things, and for those that still hold shame in things that they've experienced in their lifetime. So that's how I would describe myself, as a very curious little boy who was probably a little more inquisitive than he should have been at 10, 11, and 12 years old.
I think that's for all kids, right? At that point, we're all so damn curious, like, hey, what's that? And you know,
Yes.
at some point, it's funny because I remember my nephews just turned 13, 12, and I have a 5-year-old nephew, and they're adorable right now. But I remember watching them grow up, and like when they became old enough to recognize that, you know, when they no longer should take showers with their parents, they're like, what's that? It's like, don't look there anymore. All right, never mind. You're taking a shower by yourself. We all have that curiosity, right? And you even talk about yourself being a sponge. There was one of the things that what's funny is through your book, there are unfortunately a lot of things that I feel like, well, not unfortunately, some of them are very fortunate that I feel like I can relate to. And unfortunately, some other things I can also relate to. And I'm not a gay black boy. I was a gay white boy.
Right.
But both had very religious upbringings. One of the things that I thought was interesting was, and I love how you put it, I found my writings the other day. When I was in high school, I found my poetry journal, and it talked about how I felt like, yes, I can have everything. White people say I can't. I don't believe that. I'm going to take it all. And you actually something similar here. Where I have you underlined here. You wanted to do everything. You wanted to be an Olympian. You wanted to be in track, which you love to do. You run at a young age, everything with it. But you started to design a dress because you wanted to be a designer at one point.
Yes.
This was something I'm going to read this part here. So really condensing this for everybody else. Star Search was coming. You wanted to be a singer. You wanted to be an Olympian. And then you started drawing women's clothing, remembering that, and you started showing one of your designs to Aunt Faye.
Yes.
And you were 6 years old. That's so young. You said you were so proud of it. So you looked at her and said, look, this is what I want to do. And this is what I want to be when I grow up. Aunt Faye looked at me and said, you want to be a woman? I did not know how to respond except laughed. Confused, I replied, no, a designer. There was still a look of disgust on her face that made me just close the conversation. This sat with me a long time as I felt embarrassed because she basically called me a woman in front of everyone. I was confused and curious simultaneously. I strongly believe that this one comment ignited my gender and sexual curiosity. I think that's so, what year was this? Because you were 6 years old.
Yeah, it was 1986.
1934, right?
No, I love my age. I don't look it, but I love my age. So it was 1986.
1986.
Yeah.
And times were different then, but
yes,
especially knowing that we all had that moment. And it's funny, it was my aunt too. It's like, oh my God. And
they tend to know.
Yeah, it was my aunt, right? Every gay boy loves their aunt.
Right.
Yeah, at some point. But your experience was very visceral, like that. I can just see her face being disgusted with that.
Mm-hmm.
So how else did that play out? Did you ever design that dress? Ever make it? Did you ever do any more designing from it?
I did actually. So my biological mother was remarried many years later, and I actually designed her wedding dress. So that was really cool, a cool experience. And again, I sort of laugh about this as an adult because I'm like, oh, hello, I designed your wedding dress. Like, I was gay, you know? Like, not to say that all designers are gay, but, you know, just again, of being in the environment that I was in, it was like, it was, everyone said to me, you know, after people that knew me or for years would all say to me after reading my book, it was like, we all knew, like you just marched to the beat of your own drum. You had your own style, your own fashion sense at 12 and 13 years old. You were still curious about everything, but also extremely confident. But I think one of the things I've also learned is a lot of people felt like I was a confident kid and a teenager, but without knowing what I was actually experiencing and going through day by day. You know, having sex with girls and being super, you know, confused about that because I was still looking at this boy over here, and then starting to have sex with boys and was like, but wait a minute, society says this, and I'm religious. We go to church every Sunday. I'm involved in the, you know, youth programs and choirs and all this sorts of things. Like, I'm not supposed to feel this way. So it was just a very confusing time. And it's just funny to hear people say, yeah, we knew, like, you know, like it was no big deal. And I wish it could have been no big deal back then, because I feel like things would have been so vastly different. And my life would have played out vastly different if it would have been okay for everyone back then.
It's interesting because when you discover you're gay, you're like the last one to know. You know what I mean? Like everyone around,
yes. Right.
they're not surprised, right? And
Right.
then, like, well, how did you miss it? The people who didn't see, I'm like, how did you miss this? Right? Do you see this?
Absolutely. Right.
I
Right.
speak and glitter falls out of my mouth. How did you miss it? So, but something else I want to mention. So something that I find that for a lot of our community, the relationships with our mothers are so very influential in our lives.
Mhm.
And yours never seemed to be healthy from what your book relates.
Yeah.
So that is something, mine had a bad spell, really bad spell. And then over time as an adult, it's gotten much better. But
Right.
yours never seems to be, never seemed to be really good, except for one really hard moment, which we'll
Yeah.
talk about in a minute, if I can bring myself to get to that point. But talking about things that most people didn't have to experience, and this is something I do want to ask you about, because coming from white America, I did not experience this. Now,
Right.
I did not come from a wealthy family, and we did have financial struggles, but it says here, like, the most common conversation you had with your mother was surrounding the light bill.
Mhm.
And that this got me, that apparently you did not know that you had several bills in your name as a child.
Right.
Whoa. And that,
Right.
and you also, but you said like apparently this was fairly common in the Afro-American community growing up poor.
Absolutely. I never knew that, but I see some folks shaking their head on the call right now. But it took me years, years and years later, where talking to other folks, being around, the African American community more and more as I got older, people would express that, and I was just like, wait, what do you mean? Like, you had that experience too? This was in your name, and now you've got an outstanding debt, this, attached to your social security number. It's just something that for some reason, again, I don't know the rhyme or reason behind it, but that is something that is, I don't know if it is now, but it was definitely prevalent, back in the 80s. I feel like probably the 70s too, in African American culture, 80s, 90s. But yeah, I was super confused by that as well. Like, what do you mean you put that in my name? Like, I'm 11 or 10, or like, I don't have bills. Like, I should be worrying about, my education and playing sports, not about, where our next meal is going to come from, or how you're going to be able to keep the lights on. And I will say that, I do talk about this a lot in the book, but, I will say that my biological mother, worked her tail off. She was extremely hardworking when we were young children, and she did everything. She worked 2 or 3 jobs to support, myself and my younger sister, and things like that. Unfortunately, as we all know, there's no book on how to be an effective, proper parent. There's no, instructional, people go to, certain types of classes or things like that. But I think, you don't always know the right thing to do. But that's one of the biggest things I hope that people walk away from after reading my book, is that it is so crucial to have the hard conversations with your children, with your nieces and nephews, with whomever, adolescent that you're around, because you have no idea how it's going to impact either negatively or positively on their lives. You're shaping young folks' lives. And if you go down a path, unfortunately, the way that my biological mother chose to, it can create great harm for a person's life. And if folks don't know how to do the necessary work around that, then it can take an even deeper negative effect on people's life, i.e. suicide or getting into drugs and things of that nature. So again, conversations must be had.
It's it just made me realize from an outside perspective, when I looked at that was something that was apparently common. It really sets your kid up backwards. It sets them up for failure if you don't teach them how to have that responsibility. So it's
Yes.
continuing this systemic poverty.
Yes.
And it just becomes generational, and then it becomes a belief, and this feeling of being unworthy and constantly behind.
Absolutely.
And if that's what you're exposed to, then yeah, it becomes cultural at that point.
Right.
The,
Right.
the lack of financial education, that's how a lot of this where Sherlock Holmes is going, is changing the conversation so people learn how to set their kids up to be successful.
Absolutely.
And there's nothing wrong, like, for example, one of the things that we talked about is setting your kids up young, helping them build credit from the day that they're born by making them an authorized user on your credit card, as long as you've got good credit. Don't give them a card, but at least you're building the longevity
Absolutely.
of credits. By the time they, get to college, they've got 18 years of
Yeah.
credit history behind them, right? But you don't actually make them responsible for the light bill. So,
And I think it's also, no, I totally agree with you. And I think it's also incredibly important to teach children about what's going to happen after high school, what's going to happen after college if they choose to go to college. There's a whole big, great, scary world out there. And if you don't know how to balance your checkbook, if you don't know how to cook a meal, if you don't know how to do your laundry, if you don't know how to say no when someone approaches you and wants you to do something that goes against your morals and your values, and you don't feel like you have the power to say no, what does that look like for a 16, 17, 18-year-old, right? I think those are the hard conversations that, that parents need to have with their kids. I get that, again, they're uncomfortable. I understand that they're not always, there's taboo and sensitive subjects, but I feel like we as adults have a responsibility to ensure that they're ready to run the country, right? When we can't run it anymore, they're ready to run the country 20, 30 years from now, because they've been given the necessary tools for success in life. So that's what I kind of feel about that.
There was a friend of mine who, shout out to Trevor Evans, love him, if he's watching this at all, but he used to say this statement. He's like, I'm raising adults to live in an adult world, not kids to live in an adult world.
Absolutely.
So we
Absolutely.
have those conversations, and it's also interesting because the goals that you set for your kids can be very limiting, because it's only, okay, get to this grade, get to graduate high school, okay, get to college, but then what? Like, people are used to having that next goal, and they get to their highest, and they're like, okay, well, now it's so scary, they're not used to planning something outside this little confined box.
Yep.
But if your mother is working 2 and 3 jobs, how the hell is she going to find the time to coordinate more life goals for you? And
definitely.
And
teach you about those things, teach you, to set the goals. And if you don't achieve that goal, how do you move past that mentally and emotionally? How do you go out and, strive for a career? How do you choose your major in college? How do you get yourself into college? Those are all lessons that kids don't, we tend to say, well, that's what the school is for, right? School is supposed to teach you about these things. School is supposed to teach you about your African-American culture. It's supposed to teach you about, history. They do a job, but they don't go into the depths that is necessary for folks to know what their history is, for folks to know, where they come from. It was only until, I say that to say, it was only until my late 20s that I went to college, got 2 degrees, but it wasn't until my late 20s that I thoroughly understood African-American culture. And I think about that as an adult with a professional career now. I'm like, that's really unfortunate to have to be in my late 20s to thoroughly understand who I come from, where I come from, who all has actually paved the way, for me to have the rights to be where I am today. So again, I think that just people say, oh, it's the school. No, I think it starts in the home.
It's the home, and the home is larger than just your house. It is your community. It's your extended family and everything that goes with it. And that Sherlock. So thank you. So I actually have some questions here I wanted to ask while we're on this topic, because I know the next one's going to get me. So I'm just going to. But some of your stuff you'd experienced by 6th grade. Dear sweet Jesus, I'm going to need a drink after this. But where's the question I asked here? So you had so many things that happened. I'm going to list a few of them so I can get to the questions. You guys have them. But by the time 6th grade ended, I had seen and experienced tons of family drama. Mom and I being abused by her ex-husband, feeling his fists as we escaped to a different state, waking up, discovering my sister had been kidnapped by him, abandoned by my biological father, watching my mom go in and out of relationships, and more. These were the reasons I wanted to be so involved in everything possible at school. They served as escapes from the negative emotions a child should never endure. You not too long after that had this line which got me, and it said, "It took me years to realize the only person suffering throughout this entire experience was indeed me. And I was developing patterns and behaviors that would follow me for years to come." 1 second, let's process. Yeah, I know. You're not looking. Matthew's right here. I'm
Hi,
saving him.
Sam. Hi, Matthew.
Hi, Terry.
So, but I wrote here.
So you can see me.
So I wrote some questions
Too
here.
much, but we're gonna get. Oh my
Well, the reasons why we're having these conversations, for those of you who don't know, what Sherlock Holmes is trying to do is bring these issues to light and bridge some of these conversation gaps that we aren't having. So a lot of the things I have been doing through 2020 and today has been so that people that I'm serving, like Matthew, like Pre, have exposure to mentors like yourself, to resources that are provided by SunServe and Sherlock Holmes and other wonderful human beings that are here to help them, like Pamela, like Susan, and Raphael, like you. I don't know you, but I'm counting you in this because you made the time to be here tonight.
Hey, Raphael.
And by the way, OH.
What?
Ah, there you go. See, I knew that. Okay, yeah.
I'm sorry, that has to be done so that everyone can hear it. IO.
My ex went to Ohio State, so he used to go H. I go IOU because he was always in that. So moving on, but that's it. Thank you. So, but the questions I asked from everything you experienced, what you're going for, was, God, I asked how many people knew of these issues you experienced, and did they offer help, or did they turn an eye on you because they were jealous of the success you had achieved as a young, effeminate gay male in your community?
There's, I'd say majority of the things that I speak about in the book, no one knew. The biggest thing, and, thank you for asking me if I was comfortable talking about Ronald, was, that became, public knowledge. That incident was, in the newspapers, court trial, all that type of stuff. So people knew that, but people didn't know about all the other things that was going on in my actual home. People didn't know necessarily what I was experiencing, questioning my sexuality. There was one person, that I had as a childhood friend. She was the only person that knew about the molestation, and she was the only person that I told. And when my biological mother eventually found out, I still to this day believe that she's the one who actually anonymously called my mother and told her. She's never told me this, but my gut says, again, she was the only person that knew. And then everything that happened after that. I've had a lot of high school friends reach out to me after reading the book and say, why didn't you tell us? That's the biggest question that they have posed to me, is why didn't you tell us? Like, I sort of, was obviously heavily involved in lots of different activities and sports and all these things in high school. And so everyone sort of saw me as that popular kid on campus that was a jock, but, super smart and into academia and on student council, but he was also a choir and a band nerd, and then in Air Force ROTC, like, pick one, right? Like, I was all over the map and with my activities, but people did not know the constant struggle that I was going through in my daily life in high school, for example. So it's actually been super nice that people have reached out that have known me since I was, an adolescent, and say, like, they just wish that I would have, found the courage to, raise my hand and say, hey guys, like I'm actually going through this and I need help. You know, I grew up around kids in high school that we were always a little smarter for our own age, and, you know, could at 17, 18 kind of felt like we could rule the world. I mean, we certainly ruled the school back then. And, you know, these are kids that were involved just like I was. And so we sort of ran the school, if you will. So what one person said to me recently, we had the keys to like every office, everything. Like we were just, you know, that group of kids. But again, everything that we did, no one knew at all, outside of, like I said, the molestation, and because that was public knowledge, no one else knew exactly what I was going through. And it shocked a lot of them. But I think the bigger point to that, from my perspective, is we never know what people are going through. We don't have, it's funny to me because we are always, oh, well, how are you doing today? My question is, well, do you really want to know? Like, are you asking because you want to spend 5 minutes and me open up and tell you how my day is? And then I'm going to ask the same thing of you? Or is that the niceties that we do as a society, right? You know, hello, how are you? Okay, goodbye. You know, you go on to your next moment. But I talk about that because I think it's so incredibly important that if somebody says to you, I'm experiencing this today, I'm going through this today, take that minute, that 60 seconds, 90 seconds or whatever, and say, well, expand on that. Do you need help with that? Because you never know when they walk away from you, what they've just sort of quasi-expressed to you, if that's going to affect negatively the rest of their day or their lives. We, especially in the LGBTQ community, have experienced suicide at such an incredibly high rate. And in my opinion, a lot of those could have been prevented. Again, we haven't taken the time to listen. We haven't taken the time to observe. We haven't taken the time to actually sit down with someone and say, let's grab a coffee. I want to know what's happening with you. Let me check in with you. It's been a month. Let me find out, you know, how you are actually doing, not just on the surface. We don't tend to do that as a society. So that's why I call attention to a lot of those things in the book, is because I feel like, again, if we just have the tough conversations, if we truly get beyond our uncomfortability around those taboo subjects, we can really truly move the needle forward and prevent those high rates of suicide in 12, 13, 14-year-olds. I had a lot of friends in 2016 to 2018 in San Francisco, adults, 30, 40-year-olds that took their own lives. I was living in Utah in 2015, and I remember this because it was 2 days before my birthday, and a friend, one of my closest friends, his partner at the time, which I didn't know this in that moment, was struggling. They had a huge fight in my condo at 2 a.m. That's why I have a guest bedroom. Y'all take that in there. I'm going to bed. Let me know if you need anything. But they had a huge fight. And it turns out that my good friend's partner at that time, he was going through a spell. He had some mental disease. And the next morning we woke up, we went to the gym, and then my friend leaves me and walks in to find, you know, his partner had hung himself. After everything that we had a great time that night, there was a few little hiccups, you know, with them, and he was acting a little strange. But if we would have just taken those 90 seconds and be like, okay, let's sit you down, let's figure out what's actually going on here and how can we help you move past this, he may not have done what he did the next morning. We may have been able to contact his parents or whatever to figure out how do we ensure that this does not happen. We can't leave this person alone in this moment. Do we get him professional help at this time? So again, I say all that to say, please talk. Please talk. It's so incredibly important.
I hear what you're saying. Do you have one question for you before we move on from it? Do you blame yourself for that?
I don't blame myself for that. And the reason being is because, you know, for those that have read the book, know that, you know, I've had a handful of suicidal attempts myself. The very first one after, I was 16, 17 years old, after being molested for, about a year, almost 2 years. So that was my first one. And then again at 18. And then I had one at 35. So, it was 35. So several years ago. So I was not equipped to deal with his situation because I had not addressed my own stuff, right? Like I had not done the work around my own internal issues, my own, sort of self-deprivation, my own hatred for my community, my own hatred for African-American, folks. I hadn't done that. So I don't blame myself. I do feel like I now can recognize the signs in folks if folks are going through some things and say, okay, again, pull that person to the side, schedule a lunch or take them out for, coffee or whatever to make sure that they're not going down that path that you've also experienced.
So for those of you who don't know, the Trevor Project does offer suicide prevention counseling. If you are experiencing anything or you know of anybody who does, I put the number in the chat box, but if you're watching on social media, it's 1-866-488-7386. It is a very sensitive topic because I know it does affect so many of us, and we're hearing more and more. I think it's always been there, but because of social media and the internet, it's more in our faces.
Yes.
And we're hearing it. And today it's also important because, especially since there's so many states trying to reverse or limit trans youth and their life.
Yes.
That's a big problem. So please have that number. Girl, I knew this was gonna happen on your end.
That's why I didn't want to be on
Oh, you
camera.
hush up over there. You're fine. Get over there and you're too, Shelby. I'm gonna be. You don't even know what that reference is. Let me tell you, getting these children over here to learn about gay history is not easy.
Oh.
Birdcage these days. Anyway,
That's why.
so yes. Oh, I can't look at Susan. Okay, moving on. So now it's also something that, I don't know if my brother's ever gonna watch these things, so I'll move on. You mentioned Ronald and what happened there. And there's a belief that when you are molested as a young child, it's, you're gay because you were molested.
Mhm.
Or you're gay because your mother put you in a dress when you were getting ready for Halloween at 4 years old, or you're gay because, your father wasn't around, or fill in the blank. Because there's always an excuse for why it is, or you're gay because God made you that way.
Yes.
It's never really one that comes up first.
Right.
And it's the truth.
Yes.
Amen. Right, Dick?
100%.
That's right. So if you are listening to this, and if you are wondering and you're a kid or you're someone struggling with sexuality, God made you this way and you are beautiful. It doesn't matter where you come from or who you are. I don't care where you've been. We just care about where you're going, and it's going up. Love yourself. And the whole thing about this book is learning how to love yourself. That's really what the journey
Absolutely.
is. But since you brought up Ronald, we're going to talk about that because you were some things that you and I had in common, being the church golden boy, being a high achieving student, being the social butterfly. I never felt like I was the popular kid, but all the popular kids knew me, all of them, like in all the different social circles. So being the gay chameleon, when you're every color of the rainbow, you can fit in anywhere. You fit in the outfit. So, so my family was also traumatized in how you wrote this. I had to stop. Like that chapter, I was okay. We come from two very different worlds. I was at this point in upper middle class suburbia in a planned urban development. Everything was perfect. Everything was manicured. The landscaping was flawless, no matter where you drove in the town. It was highly educated. Where I lived, people would commute to DC and then come back home and spend time with their, wife and their kids and their 2.5 Yorkshire Terriers and so on and so forth. And my brother My brother is younger than me by about 15 months. And being Irish twins, we fought all the time. We were very close, but we always tried to do things that the other person wasn't doing, you know. And he liked to fish like my father. So one day he went fishing and he was accosted by a man. And that day's burned into my memory. And I had also been grappling with my sexuality, and this had nothing to do with me, but I had to watch as the police officers showed up and were questioning my younger brother and my mother, hearing everybody screaming, crying, and then it doesn't stop that day, it goes on. And it never seems to stop. And I think that was the day that ruined my family forever. And you say the same thing from your experience. And your line was when your mother found out, when your anonymous call tipped your mother. It was one of the moments you said actually that you guys actually bonded. Nothing else mattered in that short period of time except her love and support from me. Unfortunately, it was the last time we shared such a connection. The moments after seemed all a blur. Everything from our pastor and his son offering in-person support and guidance, cops questioning me, Ronald being arrested, charges filed, and the story breaking in the newspapers. My mind and my heart were all over the place during this time, walking around knowing that everyone knew. People staring, church members whispering. Teens could be cruel, and guys were already teasing me for being feminine. This made things far worse. And being found guilty, Ronald spent several years in prison. But not long after he paid his debt to society, Ronald found himself back in hot water again and headed back to prison for similar crimes. Throughout all of this, I knew my life had been forever changed. My biggest question was, why me? This particular life event led me down a path that took me years to get over. One would even say I'm not actually over it. Do you think there is a way for anyone to actually ever to get over an experience like that?
I do. And I think even though, again, this book was published last year, I think everything that has come my way since then has continued to empower. It has continued to strengthen my voice. And it's one thing to, it's sort of an interesting sort of dynamic where a lot of people that have known me for 5, 10, 15 years have all said, oh, we always thought you were this strong, confident, person who lived life authentically, etc. And my response in, interviews such as this is, I have been, but to a degree. I've only shown what I want people to see, right? They're not able to see all of the vulnerability. They're not able to see when I cry at home or write in a journal and talk about these things. They're not able to see that. So I do that in my own time, my own space. So that way, my persona in corporate America, in sport world, in, wherever, they see this polished, well put together, strong, gay Black boy. They don't need to see the other stuff. But one of the things, that happened for me last year with this pandemic, obviously Black Lives Matters and everything that happened with that last year, is I don't care who knows anymore. I think that was the moment. And some people say, wow, I was actually having a conversation with someone at Starbucks last night, and he's sort of shared his journey and sort of going to Europe and backpacking for 8 months and really sort of writing this blog, and then published a book himself on his journey and after a 20-year divorce and things of that nature. And I was sort of blown away by, how we actually all do experience very similar experiences, regardless of our race, regardless of our socioeconomic status, regardless of our upbringing, our family. None of that matters. Heterosexuals deal with, infidelities in their marriage. They deal with who's going to take out the garbage. They deal with all those sorts of things, just like gay relationships deal with the exact same things. So I say all that to say, last year, I finally stood up because of this book and everything that has come after that and said, I own this. I own this. I have the ability to take my power back with this situation. I have the ability to say no more. I have the ability to say, my body is my temple, and I need to protect that. Have I protected it all these years? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But at now 41 in 3 months, enough is enough. Enough is enough. Like, playtime is over. It is now time for me to say, this happened to me. It has happened to millions of other people. And it's okay if we own that. There is no shame in experiencing this at whatever age you've experienced it. It simply makes up your DNA. It has made you a stronger person. It has made you see things from a very different lens. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, it definitely gives us stuff to think about, that's for sure. It does shape you who you are, and I like, because we all do have a human experience. I think that's something I love what I'm taking away.
Yeah.
So with BLM happening last year, and seeing that there seems to be a cultural consciousness starting to shape, both on both sides, like both good and bad. There's this, it's kind of like the more awake, the more you see, there's more good and more bad than you ever expected, especially when you look outside your own comfort level and your own environment.
Absolutely.
What is something you would like to tell white gay America that we need to know?
Yes, that's a very loaded question. I feel like I could go on forever talking to non-folks of color. I think the biggest thing—
That was very polite of you, non-folks of color. that was the most PC thing I've heard. And let me tell you, my white ass don't care. You go and say whatever you want, honey. Oh.
It's really interesting, and obviously you and I have known each other for a few months now, but I was just I'm always having conversations with people, and someone said to me the other day, why can't you call this out on social media? It's an issue, and you addressed it with this specific organization. They changed their ways, but why can't you call it? And I said, I have had to learn very quickly in the last 90 days, almost 4 months, to think about the PR from a PR perspective. So everything that I say and put out there, there's an image, and the organization that I now work for, I have to be very, very careful. I've sort of turned into a bit of a public figure here in this community. So I have to be very strategic about what I say and how I say, and because I'm not just representing myself anymore. So I've learned very quickly to be very PC.
Well, very, very, very PC of you. You should run for office. But before you do, what would you tell your white constituents that we need to know? So we can actually be better community members?
I think one of the biggest things that I realized last year is, things don't stop with color. And I want people to understand what that means. just because we are different shades, just because we come from different places, different backgrounds, upbringings, different countries, etc., guess what color our blood is? Which means we all bleed the same. So at the end of the day, your religion, your skin color, none of that matters, because when you get cut, when I get cut, the exact same thing happens. We both feel it. We both experience the pain. We both experience hurt. We both experience trauma. So one is not greater than the other. One should not be more invalid than the other. That's what I think I would want folks to know, is that there really truly is no difference. The difference is whatever higher power that you believe in, someone created us in his image. Now, again, I'm not religious, but I grew up obviously religious. I'm a very spiritual person. Helps to keep me grounded. I will say that whoever your higher power is created us in a very specific image and allowed us these differences to make the world an even prettier place, an even greater place. The beauty part of being surrounded by so many different cultures is the fact that we have the ability to learn from each other. We need to take more advantage of that. Every single situation that we experience as a society, I personally believe, is an educational opportunity. We have to constantly grow together. Just like in relationships, right? If you're not growing together, what's going to happen? You're going to grow apart. So in our society, if we're not growing together, we're going to be going in different directions. And I think we see that as a society. We have people believing way crazy out there things and left-wing things and all these other things, but it doesn't have to be that way. We are making conscious decisions to continually perpetuate the institutional racism that we were taught hundreds of years ago. But guess what? We're in a different time, in a different era. We can't be living life the same as we did 50 years ago. Because again, things are different. Technology is different. Social media is here. So we have to adjust to the times. So I say all that to say, we are truly no different. And once we actually realize that, the better we will be as a society.
And that's how I brought up my children.
And that's why your kids are healthier than this one right here.
For real.
This one right
You
here,
guys
yeah.
are fortunate.
So
So the time came out to me, he came home one day, and let me tell you, I knew from almost birth, okay? But I let him be, and he came home and said, I just broke up with my boyfriend. And I said, oh, baby, I'm so sorry. You're hurt, you must be hurting. And he goes, did you hear what I said? I said, I heard every word.
And then she was blessed with yet another gay son after that. Yeah, genetics have a big part of it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I asked Matthew when he first came into our program, and it was a really great discussion that I learned from my high performance coach, who's Eva Meta. Like, hey Eva, if you hear this later, there you go, girl. She was having a panel on the intimacy of race, which is a book she just released. Also last year, kind of fun. But my question for you is, I learned to ask this, which I did not know was okay to ask. Do you identify as African-American or Black?
Oh, that's a very, very interesting question.
He got me with it too.
Raphael, I see your face right there too. Question's gonna go to you as well. All right. Yeah. Then you don't have to answer it, but these two, they do.
Got me with it.
Yeah. Okay.
Left field.
Here's one of the things that I learned or sort of decided at an early age, because when we moved to California, I grew up in a predominantly white town, white neighborhood. Most people were, middle class, even though, we were poor. That's why my mother worked 2 and 3 jobs, just to try to, make sure that we were able to kind of stay status quo. My mother loved to keep up with the Joneses, as they used to say years ago. Right. One of the things that I realized is people would always say, oh, well, that person's white, that person's black, all that type of stuff. Last time I checked, those were colors in the crayon box. So I'm not a big fan of referring to folks as colors in a crayon box, because we're more than crayons. So I don't get offended when people say, oh, that black person, or oh, you're black, or whatever. I do correct and say, I'm actually African-American, Jamaican, and Cherokee Indian. So that makes up who I am.
That makes up your cheekbones. Let's be
Yeah.
clear.
Right.
Right.
A little more complicated.
Right.
Like,
Bigger overarching is, yes, African American, and you can go into even deeper conversations. Well, because I know other African American folks that are like, well, I'm not African American because I wasn't born in Africa. I was born in America. Listen, honey, listen.
right. I hate that.
Listen, I joke about some of these things, but for me, I think laughter is a universal language. So I tend to throw a joke in as often as I can. It allows folks' defenses to drop and connect in a way that then you can have these tough conversations. So that's always been my approach. So I do laugh, but I'm not making light of the severity around these topics, because they are deeply rooted, and they are not things that we as a society and various cultures are over at this point in time in 2021. I don't get offended easily anymore. Now, growing up, I certainly did. Honey, there's bigger fish to fry in our society. There's bigger things that we need to be concerned about, and that we need to be educating people on, rather than being stuck on words. It is a word. It is a word. And we as a society tend to give words so much power that we will fight someone over it. We will road rage somebody over it. We will kill somebody over it. We don't have time for that, in my opinion, anymore. So much has happened in 2020 that I pray to God that people have such a very different perspective after what we've endured in 2020. It blows my mind that, here in South Florida, and again, this is a new environment for me. I've only lived here for 1.5 years. So watching and observing mentalities and approaches and work ethics is so different here. So different. I have to constantly remind myself, this is technically a red state. So how you've been raised and what you've been around is not going to be the same here. People aren't held accountable here. And I think we've seen that. George Zimmerman and people that get away with brutality here. We have seen that. So I have to catch myself sometimes here and remind myself that, people aren't going to think the way you think. People have not experienced what you've experienced. People aren't, haven't been on the West Coast, where the mentalities and the approaches to work and things like that are different. So you have to close your mouth sometimes and keep watch and observe and listen and then move. I think that's something that, I've learned in the last 1.5 years, is that because I've always been one to I got a mouth and I like to use it. So I will.
It's in the DNA.
It is very much in our culture, in our DNA. Absolutely. We'll be quick with that tongue, but it's not always the best approach.
Right.
Not always the best approach.
Put your ears on.
Right. Being very strategic in our responses, from my perspective, is so much more important now than ever, because we continue to give words so much power. Sometimes, and this is a little joke, but sometimes I also have learned, sit back and give them that rope, let them appear to be the fool that they are, and then you respond. So I hope that answers your question. Listen, call me Black, call me African American, listen, just make sure
I
you
didn't know how to answer it.
comes down to.
I didn't know how to answer that question when he first answered that. I was like, I've never been asked that.
Yeah.
So
It's a very sensitive subject too. Very sensitive subject.
It's very sensitive. I was like, I'm in the Black community, we call each other Black, but we don't call each other African American. Only people of that are not Black will call me African American.
Right.
So I guess I would identify as both, depending on who I'm talking to or who's describing me.
Yes.
I guess. I don't know.
No, and I think it does depend on an environment a little bit. Like you have to be aware of your surroundings, in my opinion, at all times. So if someone's going to take offense to something or whatever, you may want to be a little politically correct, or, you know, if you're with friends or whatever, like you just said, we tend to, in the African-American community, just say, yeah, child, we Black, you know, and that's fine. But I think that's just at that surface level.
Yep.
We're not dealing with the deeply rooted issues and the historical connotation that those terms follow. We're not doing that. And who wants to think about that? That's such heavy, you know, mentally and emotionally stuff to be dealing with every single day. So who wants to think about it? So yeah, child, we Black. You know, I get that. I get that. But I also think it's important for those that are around African Americans and Black folks, whatever you want to call it, to understand that there are such deeply rooted things attached to that. I think the other thing that's also incredibly important to note is that, now this is not always popular with folks when I talk about this, but I take fault in the African American community a lot of times because we have not always done the greatest at educating those that are not African American. And you can't go around and call people the N word, but then tell them they can't turn around and use it ourselves or themselves, right? Like that's a problem. And I get that it's again, deeply rooted in our culture and all that type of stuff. And we want to own that word, sure, but also be aware what comes with that from those that are not in our community and in our culture. We have not necessarily all traditionally done a great job of educating, you know, folks about that. So in addition to that, Jacob, you might want to stop me because I can keep going, child. Like,
I get this subject too.
Yeah, like in addition to that, we have deeply rooted racism in our own community. You know, for once upon a time, there was Blacks versus light Blacks or darker Blacks. And then there was the kinky curly hair versus the straight hair. And everyone, you know, there was people wanted to, you know, appear more white than the rest of our community. Like there are so many different layers that who has time to peel that stuff back anymore? I don't. So I'm a little bit more progressive with thought process than most people. Like I ain't got time to sit and nitpick and nope, I would rather go out and educate the masses than deal with that and nitpick at every little thing that we say and do.
So one of the things I noticed when I was in college, I went to a university on Long Island in New York, and it had a very good soccer program. So we had a lot of foreigners, also an engineering program. But because of that, we had people from Africa, from Jamaica,
Yes.
from Kenya, Ghana.
Yes.
We were multicultural. And one of the, I always like talking to guys. And I mean, I was hearing things that it was so different coming from a society where you're the majority versus one where you're the minority.
Absolutely.
And, because they would be talking to me and saying, I don't understand the women here. all I do is go to say hello, and they're like very defensive, and I said, yeah, well, you grew up in a fully Black society, so you're not different, they grew up in a
Right.
society where when a man approaches, it could be for whatever, you
Right.
know.
Right.
So I think there's a lot to be said of the differences between the United States, or even probably Australia or UK,
Mm-hmm.
versus other countries where, Caucasians are a minority when they walk in,
Absolutely. I agree, and
If
I
I
think
could,
that
I was gonna to join in because I really do think that's an important question, and for Matthew's sake, to help give some context there, I think it makes a difference. To give a little, so it sounds like Terry and I. First of all, I want to get. I don't have the book. I want to get it. I saw it on Facebook today, so I want to pick it up. It spoke when I saw the advertisement for this. It spoke to me because I just posted something about Lil Nas X and his
yes,
when he wrote
yes,
when he was saying that about his 14-year-old. So writing a letter to his 14-year-old self. But that idea, sounds like I think I'm just literally 10 years older than you. We sound. I think you mentioned before. I just turned 51. I was born in 1970. So when you said 86 and you were like, okay, I'm figuring that out. So we're about 10 years apart, but still in that same bracket.
yes,
I remember when the term African American came about. It was during Jesse Jackson's presidential run in 1980 or
yep,
1984. I forget which one it was. And I remember at that time, everybody was Black, and it was okay to be Black, and
yes,
there was not a being
yes,
Black was beautiful, and Black was be proud. And so I kind of grew up.
yes,
Then when they said this African American, we're like, okay, nobody really consulted me, but I mean, it works out. It
Exactly.
works out okay. And I think though we're as the pendulum has kind of swung back as we are dealing with Black Lives Matter and things like that. It
yes,
does take, at least from my personal view, it takes a little. There's a little pride in being Black versus African American. But I don't care. I would rather
yeah,
you call me Black or African American than the N word, because then
that's right,
we have a problem.
right,
But other than that, but I think more importantly to your earlier point, Terry, about taking time to talk to people, the reason we've condensed all of this into this very narrow, very quick shorthand is because we don't take time, because we look at the surface and we assume based on the surface that you are. I know people who look like me who have zero African American blood or African blood in them at all, because they came, from some other place, and we don't.
right,
So we don't take the time. We do assume. We make the
yes,
assumption you
yes,
have more melanin in your skin than I do, and therefore you are Black or African American.
absolutely,
Not that, like you just said, Cherokee and Jamaican and
right,
Brazilian and everything else that may be out there. And so we've condensed this down to this, we're using this shorthand. And so I think it is a personal decision, but I do think it's
yeah,
an important question, because it goes back to what you said earlier about taking the time to talk to people and to find out from them what, how do you, for me, it does. I was born and raised, I am in Columbus, Ohio, by the way, just so you know. So I am a true Buckeye, but I was born and raised in Texas and Houston, and I've lived all over the country for various reasons. So I've experienced, kind of race and relations and things on a really broad scale. And it does make a difference to, based on who you're talking to. But to your point, call me, just don't call me late for dinner. I don't care
Oh, that's
what you
fine.
call me. It doesn't matter. But I do prefer you not call me the N-word. But if I'm
yeah,
Black and you whatever, or if I am, African American, it doesn't make that big of a deal, but it's personal. And that's why I was saying that for
yeah,
Matthew's sake. You kind of, he's growing up in a different era, where I came on the heels of, a lot of things where there was pride in being called Black versus
Of course.
anything else. And then Jesse
definitely,
Jackson decided we were African American, and then we all just said okay.
right.
I was like African
Well, it
American.
was Jesse Jackson. Like we
It
were like,
was Jesse
okay.
Jackson.
I've only seen African American on official government paperwork,
Well,
That's really the only
Terry, go ahead. I was going to say that was it is believed to be, and the reason that came about to it, it's believed to be a more polite term. But if you don't want
Yes.
it's necessarily PC, not politically correct, it's just polite because you are it was his idea of identifying people of color,
Yes.
of African descent, but also acknowledging their American heritage as well. And so that's kind of where it
And not
came
only
from.
that, I feel like what it means to be African American, it kind of means be like, to me, it's like, for me, it's like, well, I really don't know. If you really want to keep it honest, I really don't know, but most of it, it's Africa. Where in Africa? Still don't know.
Yeah.
You know? But for me, I would pick, like, if I had to choose, it would be Black, white, and Native American. That's what I know from the closest, you know?
Yeah, here's one of the things that I will say. First of all, I hate those boxes on all that paperwork. Like I get the purpose of them, but I hate those boxes. I actually used to get in trouble by that same biological mother that we've talked about. I used to get in trouble by checking other. And I would check other probably in my early teens when she would be like, no, you go ahead and fill out that paperwork or whatever. I also have extremely nice penmanship. So I used to copy my mother's handwriting all the time. So she would be like, nah, you just fill it out. So therefore I was exposed to all those boxes early on as an adolescent. I would always choose other. And it wasn't until I got to college and a friend in college, a former teammate said, why do you choose that? Like, you're Black, so check the Black box. And then I sat there for a moment before I responded and I said, that's not the only thing I am. So why am I going to choose just one thing when it's requiring me, they want to know what your ethnicity is. Well, I have 3 of them. So why am I not choosing all 3 of them? It's easy to, then I obviously years later learned the whole putting yourself in boxes and very specific categories. And I'm just like, I'm so against that type of stuff now too. I'm like, that's what makes us so, like, we don't have to be in a box. You don't have to be just Black or African American. Like, you be what you want to be at the end of the day. Right?
So when you tell, like, African Americans who, say for instance, light skin, like my mother, for instance, my mother's very light skinned. Like, her and Jacob wear the same foundation color. Swear to God. And she identifies as a Black woman. But when you're 8 years old and you're finally, like, knowing the differences between things, you ask her, Mom, the kids out there are saying, like, you're white. We're in a predominantly Black area. Like, the kids out there saying, like, picking on us, like, Mom, you white. Like, so Mom, are you white? Because I know you say you're Black, but you're not Black like their mom.
Yeah.
So then she'll kind of dawn on us. Well, that's when you have that little conversation for the first time about, well, Black people in America have a different history. It's like, oh, okay, I didn't think about that. But you don't know that because they don't teach you that in school.
Right.
They don't even go into slavery.
Right.
Like
absolutely.
That. So,
and then what happened in slavery also, right? Like, how did some of us end up, half Caucasian or looking light-skinned or whatever? So it's funny that you say that because my biological mother is a twin. And if you were to, pretty much all of their lives, even to this day, my mother still is what they call high yellow.
Yeah.
Yes, my mother is very high yellow. And they could pass for white and Caucasian.
Or biracial. Like, if I put
my
mom
absolutely
to a biracial girl, she doesn't
absolutely
from hair to the skin to the features. And I'm
absolutely.
Like, somebody, like, what's happening? But you have to explain it for me.
Right.
I would share this, and not to belabor the point, but my mother also is very, very light skinned. And when I was young, very young, she got a speeding ticket, or was pulled over, given a speeding ticket, and the officer checked Caucasian on the ticket, and that's how she ended up not having to pay it, because she is not. Now, advanced several years in when I was in my mid to late 20s. Um, she had a it was a she had a friend who knew her kids when we didn't know we knew each other. At any rate, long story short, the woman saw me and then asked me about my mom. She was, well, that can't be your mom. It's like, what are you talking about? She's like, that can't be your mom. I was like, that is my biological mother. She gave birth to me, even though my dad is much darker, and so I'm kind of came out somewhere in between. And this woman, who was also African American, actually went to my mom and told her, well, that can't be your son. My mother's very defensive. She's Mama Bear about her children. And
Right.
she did not take kindly to this woman telling her that the child who she had the longest labor with was not her own. And so
Right.
that becomes, so that's kind of the layer. That's where we get into some of those layers. So
Absolutely.
I'll leave. I don't want to, belabor that point, but I think I think it is important, and that's part of the identity that we're dealing with. Even when we're talking about being Black gay boys or even Black queer boys, those are things that still it's as complicated on those levels as it is on the sexual orientation level, as
That's
it
right.
is, those, and then that's where intersectionality comes in, because then all of that, it's all layered on top of each other.
That's right.
And you're dealing with, multiple things at once.
Absolutely agree.
So interesting. We could go on for this forever, because now this is where it's getting good. Like, the oven's been preheated. They put in the casserole. It's starting to bake a little bit. It's just really yummy now. But like, I would love to actually get on these conversations about how gay culture it's so intertwined with Black culture, because it's really repressed cultures that share qualities. But how in 2020 it was so interesting how there was a social media, what are they called, influencer, who was called out for stealing Black female heritage and culture. And I was like, ooh,
yes.
This is good. And I got the popcorn, I was watching. But I was like, there's so many things we can go on and talk about, which I want to do. And we're going to be doing those. And well, people got to tune back in for this stuff. This is where it's going to be more fun as we go. So we'll let that happen, because I don't want to take up any more of your time, because and a 45-minute call has now been an hour and a half. So we will, it's been 15 minutes. So, but anyway, the link for the book is there in the chat. I'll also put it on social media as well for you guys to have. Terry Dyer is the author of Letters to a Gay Black Boy. It is a very, it's a read. It is definitely worth reading, and I recommend that you do it with a glass of cognac beside your bedside table, and maybe if you are so inclined, a joint, so you can actually calm your nerves down at the end of it, which is also discussed in the book. So, because you are very authentic, I would like to start. I do not like the term politically correct. I'd rather be like authentically correct from here on the show. So we're gonna make that a thing to happen. But Terry, it's been so great having you. I'm so enjoying getting to know you. And if you're interested in find out more about Terry's organization, SunServe, you can find them online at sunserve.org, and how they are supporting the LGBTQ community here in South Florida. Yes. And we are so glad to have shared this time with you. So thank you guys so much for being part of it. Susan, you're coming up. You're going to be on here soon. She's like, oh crap.
She's like, okay.
She is. And you got some great stories to share.
I don't know how you're going to manage that one with all three of us.
Oh, honey, I've managed it once before. Oh my God. Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
That's fine. It's going to be a lot.
Come back next Monday.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. And Raphael, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to have another call next. Yeah. We're going to have this again next Monday at 7 Eastern, and it will be delightful. So
thank you so much. This was really, really informative. Terry, I'm excited about reading. I'm getting ready to order it right now. I'm excited about reading the book, and maybe I can contribute more, have a bit more education about what we're talking about based on the book. But thank you so much. Thank you for what you're doing. And Jacob, thank you so much for hosting this. I really appreciate it. It has been a very well spent hour for me. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Come and follow us on social media, Sherlock Holmes Foundation. Yeah.
I will find. I'm going to look. I didn't see. I'm going to look you up as well. Yep.
Well, good.
Look you
We'll be
up as
found
well.
eventually. We're going to make a difference among homelessness in our community. That's what we're
There we
doing.
go. There we go. Well, we will. I would love to stay connected. So thank you much. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you all. Thank
Be
you.
blessed. And
Okay.
stay safe. Bye-bye, everybody.
Goodbye.